delighted to be chairing some of these sessions, these short and sharp sessions here on the ED Extra stage. And this first one looks at carbon removals, which has long been a kind of at the heart of the net zero debate. But questions remain as to whether it's about genuine carbon reduction and solution, or whether it's just becoming an easy excuse for companies to delay those deep emissions cuts. And we're going to get into all that with our two panelists here. We're going to explore where carbon removals fits in to the wider net zero puzzle, what businesses need to see in the market to invest with more confidence. And we're going to look at integrity and the role of carbon markets in nature restoration. So I'm joined by Tom Byrne from British Airways, and from Oxford Net Zero, Kaya Axelsson. I'm going to ask them to introduce yourselves briefly to our audience.
Sure. Great. Lovely to see you all this morning. So I work with the University of Oxford's research program on pathways to net zero. We have been around for about 5 years. We have geologists, economists, lawyers, anthropologists who are understanding the politics of removals. And we look at how net zero standards, policy, and corporate practice can align to credible pathways that keep us within a safe operating limit for our planet.
Great. And Tom?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. So I head up the net zero team of British Airways. My team's all about trying to accelerate our action to net zero by 2050 or sooner. So I've got a job for 25 years at least. And, our net zero program is all about using less fuel, using low carbon fuels, and importantly, carbon removal. So look forward to talking to you about that today.
Excellent. Before we get into the chat then, there is the opportunity to ask the panel questions. So do use your Slido and find the ED Extra stage and just send them over. We'll get through as many as we can. We've only got a short amount of time, but we'll do our best. So anyway, let's kick off then. When we talk about net zero pathways then, where do we see carbon removals in that conversation, in that debate?
Yeah. So when I write a corporate net zero pathway or a corporate net zero standard, the first thing you start with is sort of a modeled pathway. What can the organization do over the next 3 decades that can reduce its emissions? That's the first question you ask. That's in line with the mitigation hierarchy. And we have some helpful models globally that can kind of act as rules of thumbs or benchmarks for each sector. So the first thing I would look to is, what does the sector look like? What does that pathway look like? So I look to the IEA or the IPCC for that sector. And then what you would find is sort of the curve of what we expect technology to be doing and their economic assumptions in those models. And then you end up with what we call a residual emissions. And those are at the net zero target date, what we have kind of been unable to reduce at that stage. Now, typically, on average, across all sectors, that can be, 5 to 10%. But for certain sectors, like the airline industry, it can be, around 20% or more. And so then that is the target date, 2050 or mid-century is when we know we need to meet net zero in order to stabilize temperatures. So there's an acknowledgement across IPCC pathways that we need to meet net zero. We need to stabilize our atmosphere before we finish reducing 100%. We need to mostly reduce by that stage, but there is some extra where we need to basically take the plug out of the bathtub and start removing carbon from the atmosphere. And that's where the kind of role of durable and safe, high-quality removals comes in. And the big risk is that we are not planning for that future and we don't scale up that industry. And we need to scale up that industry quite a lot by 2050 in order for us to meet our temperature goals.
Okay. And Tom, for British Airways, you've bet big on carbon removals.
Well, to Kaya's point, I don't think it's betting big. I think it's about actually trying to build an industry that you're going to need. So if you look at our net zero model, and it's available on our website, it's fairly simple. We have essentially a rule of thirds. So 1/3, we think we can reduce our emissions by new technology, new aircraft technology, flying more efficiently, and really reducing how much fuel we're using, right? The next third is all about sustainable aviation fuel, which is a real, reducing our emissions over the life cycle, and we think that could do another 1/3 of emissions from where we're going to be. But our residual emissions are much higher than many other industries. And you can't just do the first 2 things and then wait until 2040, 50 and go, okay, where are these removals at? Because we're going to need millions of tons of this stuff by 2050. And by sitting on your hands today, it's not going to build the industry that you're going to need in the future. So some call it betting. I would argue that actually it's strategic investment for ourselves and the industry to help get the scale we're going to need. I think we need more of it.
Is there a danger that you over-rely on these carbon removals, though?
The danger, I think, is that we are neither reducing nor scaling removals fast enough. To pit them against each other in order to hold back progress is not the answer. To both scale removals, which, frankly, if we do it right with durable removals, that will be quite expensive. And so the incentive to reduce will also be quite strong. That's how, good carbon pricing works. And it's the true cost of removing that carbon. It's cleaning it up out of the atmosphere. So if we do it right and we set the standards correctly, then there's not a risk. But if we set the standards too low and people just buy the cheap stuff instead of doing the difficult decarbonization themselves, there is a risk.
Yeah.
And, when we talk about carbon removals, British Airways, we're talking about 1,000-year plus durability, mechanical or other very durable and with high permanence CDR credits, right? These things aren't cheap.
No.
We're not talking about, more affordable nature-based solutions that would be cheaper than, let's say, SAF. We're talking about really high quality things, right? So if I look at my program today, the thing that makes the least sense in the business case is removals, right? It doesn't make sense. Because if I can reduce my fuel consumption, I save money.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant thing. With SAF, we have loads of incentives and regulations globally that are moving us towards SAF. That makes more sense from business case. So actually, if I was looking at pure economics, removals would make zero sense today. So I wouldn't say there's a risk in the short term, at least for BA, of removals being a kind of get out of jail free card. Actually, what we need to do is invest some money that actually could be better used for reducing emissions and SAF, because we know long term that's going to be a really important part of our program.
And the long term is crucial. Give us a sense then of the sort of projects you're investing in, because presumably the carbon removal will come much later in some of those. Give us some examples of some of the things.
Yeah. So so last year we announced about £9 million worth of removal credits that we're buying into. Some of these things are direct air capture facilities in Iceland and in the US. They're delivering in like late 2020s. And we're also looking at some kind of near-term solutions as well, like biochar. We're buying a few thousand tons of that. Enhanced rock weathering, ocean alkalinity enhancements, river alkalinity enhancements. We're looking at kind of a broad church of removal technologies. And it's a balance of trying to find products that can deliver in the short term, but can scale in the long term. I think that's what's really important, is trying to find the technologies and the companies that have the best ability to get to that gigaton scale, because that's the type of scale we're going to need in the future.
Yeah. And how do you ensure the projects you're investing in will, provide the carbon removals that you're saying they will?
I'd like to hear Kaya's thoughts on the quality of the market and how you can build that in. I mean, for us, it's obviously due diligence. It's relying on really strong MRV. So actually monitoring these projects, how are they actually performing, and having that live feedback. And it's also working with partners as well. Like last year, for example, we worked with a broker called Curate, and they helped us a lot with their science team, really understand some of these removal pathways, the players in those pathways. Also talking to the likes of the registries like Isometric and Puro, and talking to their science teams as well. Increasingly, we're seeing like rating agencies pop up. Like B0 are one that I know of, who are actually rating credits, almost like a financial product, which is interesting. So I think we'll see a greater industry around quality and assurance emerge. And I think it's about partnering and learning from the scientists, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, Kaya, what's going to give more companies the confidence to invest large sums of money in this?
Well, I think regulation is going to come. So I think British Airways and companies, there are very few actually today, companies that are entering this sort of pre-compliance stage with the forethought that you are. And I think it's, and I don't hand out compliments to companies regularly. It really is kind of anticipating that this is an industry that is going to need to scale for the tech removals probably 1,000 times by 2050. And as he said, is he going to have the kind of offtake agreements in place so that that's going to be a reliable option for them, a cost-effective option for them. Companies that are not getting in on the ground floor in this pre-compliance stage are going to have a big shock if removals get integrated into the ETS, if regulation comes in requiring net zero. And let's think about where we are in the regulatory landscape. At the moment, across the G20 and even beyond, actually, we think that regulation is like this European baked concept, but our regulation tracker shows that mandatory transition plans and mandatory disclosure is widespread around the world. So if you're a globalized company, you need to be setting out what your transition plan is. What's the obvious next step? We need to know if you're meeting your transition plan. And so it's companies that are thinking about the technologies that they're going to need for the future that are preparing themselves for that. And that's why it is commercially a smart bet, even if it right now looks like an investment.
Yeah. Thank you for your questions. We've got some great ones coming in. This one for you, Tom. If carbon removals make no commercial sense, how do you convince the board to invest in them?
Maybe I was a bit strong when I said make no commercial sense. I mean, in terms of, how easy is it with our finance team for this conversation? Compared to saving fuel and money, it's obviously a much harder conversation than that. I think it's taking the long-term view, and to Kaya's point, it's not talking about it as a kind of as a gamble. It's talking about what the long-term future looks like, and in painting out the picture to them in regards to if we're going to achieve our voluntary commitments on net zero, which we've all put into our annual reports and which investors are taking as as read, and our banking partners are believing in, we have to have a plan for every wedge. Yeah. And it's very clear that up until recently, we had a pretty weak plan on removal. So it was helping them understand that the investments required going slightly earlier than maybe some of our competition was on paper quite challenging. But they can see it from a strategic advantage of, okay, if we start buying from these folks today, are we going to improve our internal experience and knowledge about this product? So we can have a march on our competitors in the future when these things may be in higher demand. Can I actually negotiate an upside for myself, as BA? So can I say, okay, I'll do a 5-year offtake with you, but for that I want, a right of first offer on your next plant, which guess what is 10 times the volume and half the price. So by putting my money in today, I can negotiate some future access that my peers don't have. I think regulatory environment's really important. We're talking about, removals being, acknowledged in the ETS. Well, actually, if that comes into play in 2029, 2030, you have to buy your removals now.
Yeah.
For them to be delivered then. So actually, if I'm forecasting what's going to happen with regulations as well. So I think you need a finance team who are relatively carbon literate. And I think you need a finance team who are good on long-term strategy and not just on short-term budget cycles.
Sure. Is there an argument also that the carbon removals projects you invest in need to have some sort of social dimension or nature restoration or biodiversity restoration element to them?
It's an important question you ask because there are different types of carbon removal projects. And I want to make an important distinction on this panel. I think this kind of savvy audience will know this, but not everybody does. Not all credits are removals. The majority of the voluntary carbon market today is actually an avoided emission or an emission reduction. That's not going to get us to net zero. That math doesn't work out if all companies were to pay someone else not to emit while they continued to emit. So only 4% of the market today is actually a carbon removal, and less than 1% of that is what we call tech-based or really truly durable removals. That includes things like remineralization or direct air capture with long-term geological storage. Now, the long-term geological storage options, those sort of tech-based options, they don't have as many social co-benefits. I'll be honest, they make jobs. And they're really cool technologies, and they help us in energy clusters that can make our energy system more efficient. But apart from that, they don't have the kind of co-benefits that nature-based projects would have. The problem is that if you invest in nature-based projects for the kind of fossil emissions we're putting up into the atmosphere that has a lifespan of 1,000 years, that's not going to be a good trade-off against, the 1,000-year timeline, because nature-based projects are very good short-term carbon sinks. But as we know from the shifting land use practices, the shifting wildfires, the increased climate risk, nature is going from what used to be a very, very good sink to actually a source where we're releasing emissions from nature and the atmosphere. And that's a very dire circumstance that we need to get our heads around. Now, I'm not against investing in nature-based projects. I think what we would advocate is a transition, because most of the removals you can buy are what we would call nature-based today, right? But that gives us a little bit of a buffer, a window, or a cushion while we scale up these more durable options, so that we don't pass the buck back onto to future generations. If you think about net zero as a balance, if the re-release of carbon goes back into the atmosphere, that balance is broken. And then what, do our kids have to recapture that and bring it down in 100 years? That's not kind of intergenerational justice project. And so, we want both forms of removals to be invested in, but for things like airlines, it really is these durable options. And that's why I'm applauding, because most companies today, when I fly, are not investing in the durable stuff. They're probably investing in emission reduction credits. If any removals at all are in the mix, I would be surprised for a lot of them. So I would be personally, first of all, I don't fly as much as I can, but I would be personally much more likely to pick BA over another company because they've actually spent money on durable removals as opposed to these other options.
Yeah, on that, Tom, have you started communicating this stuff with your customers? And do they care about what you're doing? What's the appetite for understanding more about what you're doing?
So I mean, we do talk to our customers about our general plans on climate and what we're doing. I think for us at the moment, we have to be extremely humble about actually the progress we are making, because even though we made £9 million worth of investment last year, that is a drop in the ocean to our annual emissions. So we don't want to over kind of share about what we're doing and making it a big deal. I think it's about awareness raising for the wider industry and other business customers about what they could do as well. And I think customers do understand and care. I think they expect us to do it. So that's the feedback we get from customers is, as an airline, I expect you to act on this stuff for me so I can fly in the future. And we take that quite seriously. So we do communicate, but in the right way, and certainly not at the moment in regards to over egging our progress, because it's still very early days.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to say about co-benefits, though, if you will, is some removal technologies have some clear co-benefits. If you look at things like biochar, we're finding that the communities that we're working with are seeing some really good things in regards to soil productivity, soil health, and farming productivity. So that's a really good thing. Interestingly, on the mechanical side, we're seeing that this could be a really good opportunity for that just transition. So if you talk to a lot of the folks, particularly in the States, around where these direct air capture plants are going to be based, a lot of them are in Texas, Louisiana, red states, if you will, if you look at the US political system. And the reason why they're there is because they have some really good natural reservoirs for carbon to go, but they have really good jobs, really good skills, and there's still a lot of momentum in the States behind investing in these things locally, not because of the climate aspect, because we know at the moment that could be a bit contentious over there, but actually from a jobs perspective, from a local economy perspective. So I see mechanical removals in particular as being an interesting pivot in regards to how we can actually reskill labour, bring jobs and productivity back to some of these areas that were reliant on oil and gas in the past, and actually can you transform that economy in a cleaner way?
Yeah.
Good co-benefit.
You've talked about how your finance teams are supporting this stuff, but what about external finance? Got a question here. How can external finance, for example, banks, work better with yourself and the company treasury teams to facilitate investments in this stuff?
So we've got a really good example of working with one bank in particular, Standard Chartered. So their team is pretty progressive on this stuff, if I say so. And we worked with them on a deal a couple of years ago. It was a UK-based firm called Undo, enhanced rock weathering, based in Scotland, really interesting. And essentially, we worked with Standard Chartered to basically say, we'll put our offtake down. We will confirm we will buy this stuff when it gets delivered, but they need project financing. Yeah. And so Standard Chartered came in and said, okay, well, we'll provide the financing based on BA, your long-term offtake. And that's how we work together. So Standard Chartered get something out of the deal because they get a return on their investment, and they can put money towards good clean projects. And then we get a project that can be developed. And so I think that's where banks can really come into their own. It's how can they help finance these projects that we need, and how can we work together in regard to making these projects more bankable for you?
Okay.
I mean, this is where I get so excited about these new kind of financing arrangements. Typically, we would have seen a carbon credit market where something is just a ton and you pay for it and it's just a single transaction and you don't really know much about the project financing or the additionality of it or the long-term kind of commitment from the company. And, that's a good demand signal, but it's ultimately not what we need in order to have the sort of breakthroughs in technologies for the future over the next 3 decades that are going to have to scale at an exceptional pace. We are going to need these kinds of novel financing arrangements where you have a company saying, we will purchase this, and ideally putting some money down in escrow or something, as well as the financer coming in and saying, I see this as an opportunity for returns for us because the demand is there, the supply is there, and I can just come in, from the capital market or from the banks and say, yeah, this looks like a good deal for the future and for our finances. And that's where it's quite different from the way the carbon credit market has operated in the past. And I see it potentially scaling much faster in certain arrangements.
Yeah. And that's how it works with Standard Chartered. We actually put some money down as a deposit, if you will. And then that gave them the confidence to say, okay, yeah, we will bank this project. And I speak to carbon removal companies all the time. And the main thing they need is firm offtake commitments so they can go and get financing. And it's really hard for them to get financing without that. So if you are a company and you are interested in removals, the best thing you can do is provide this long-term certainty of purchase, because without that, the financing won't come and the credits won't come.
Yeah. We have a few more specific questions here. One that's attempting to connect the dots between today and yesterday. We had Professor Miles Allen doing a keynote opening yesterday who talked about geological carbon intensity. Is that something that you measure in terms of fuel use at British Airways, Tom?
Geological carbon intensity. I've never heard that term before.
No, so you missed.
Can someone explain that to me quickly?
I work very closely with Miles, and he's coming up with new terms all the time, so I'll have to talk to him about this. I think that so geological net zero would mean that the emissions you're putting up into the atmosphere are being brought down into geological storage. Yeah. I think what he's probably referring to is what fraction of your total emissions is geologically being stored. I think that's what he means, because carbon intensity is usually a fraction in terms of efficiency, but he's trying to use that as a way to promote geological storage.
Sure. Okay. Well, at the moment, it's our geological storage is very small because we've bought into projects, but they're not delivering today. They're delivering into the future. In my world, carbon intensity is how much emissions you're putting out per passenger you're flying, and that's down 14% since 2019. So that's good. But over to in terms of where we're heading, we've stated very clearly our net zero will only work if the residual emissions are netted off with durable carbon removals, and that's it. So a lot of that will be durable geological storage. Some of that will be through like enhanced rock weathering, aquatic storage as well. But we're fairly agnostic in regards to the type, as long as it hits the permanence and the durability.
I think you could consider enhanced rock weathering geological potentially.
Yeah.
It's in the geosphere.
Yeah.
Right?
Potentially it is.
Some of the ocean CDR as well. So I think Miles would be pleased with your answer.
Okay.
Excellent.
He's here even when he's not here.
Indeed. Kaya, one for you. Are there any organizations or companies known for having scientifically rigorous criteria for the highest quality carbon removal?
Yeah, I'm not here to promote companies, and as much as I think BA is doing the right thing, I'm still going to try and not buy from you as much as possible. But what I can say is the question is about how do you know about the quality of a removal? There's a couple of things you need to look at. There's different physical characteristics of different options. And so that's why organizations like the ones that he mentioned that sell carbon removals have methodologies for the MRV. The ICVCM is a kind of a group, an institution that is looking at that supply side. I think it stands for the Integrity of the Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative. And they develop kind of common agreement on what those methodologies are, right? And so you can look to those methodologies and see, is the person you're buying from lining up with this kind of agreed standard that has been developed? Right. And then if you are looking at different types of removals, you can think about, okay, well, this is a remineralization, for example. What could go wrong here, right? That's the first question you're going to ask. What could go wrong here? Is there a land grab happening? That could be a social, negative consequence. Has there been a kind of audit or due diligence on how this could affect the local community? Is the local community getting money based on this project deal, or is it just a broker that's kind of skimming off the top of it? These are the questions that you would ask almost on any project you're developing around the world. And the core carbon principles of the ICVCM, I think there's 10 of them, outline a list of principles like that you would want to look to and do due diligence on. But maybe you've done this process.
No, I think it's all about the questions you're asking, right? Because we in our team, we're not all climate scientists. We're not all experts in this field. It's about asking the right questions and finding the right partners that you can trust. I think that's really important. I also think going and seeing these things and actually kicking the tires, so to speak, is really important. So, we bought into Climeworks based in Iceland, and we went to see it, and we met the team, and we took time to understand the technology, and then that gave us confidence to say, okay, I now I'm seeing this, I can understand the science a bit more. We can kind of believe in it a bit more as well. So I think it comes down to asking the right questions, to partnerships, seeing for yourself, and then also not just buying and forgetting about it. Maybe like we used to do with offsets in the past, certain companies. It's about trying to say, okay, well, how are we getting on? What is the data saying? How is the monitoring verification going? And being curious about that. And I think that's a really interesting part of removals that we've not really necessarily had with voluntary markets before.
Yeah, and I'll just add that this has been really encouraging in the last year because of high integrity demand from companies. We've seen much more quality in the voluntary carbon market as a whole. The carbon credits that are low quality are not being bought and sold, and the carbon credits that are of higher quality, thanks to savvy buyers, the market is actually finally starting to shift after years of pitfalls that caused boom and bust cycles. So these active kind of market makers on the company and demand side are really starting to create a shift that I didn't think would happen personally.
Yeah. And so, Tom, looking ahead then, and the progress you've made, which you've explained, but what are the things that are missing? What else do you need help with, specifically on carbon removals?
So I think the thing that would make carbon removals, in terms of the BA standpoint, again, a lot of traction, would be that regulatory environment and the regulatory support. So I mentioned SAF earlier. SAF's a really key pillar of our decarbonisation plan, but we're seeing incredible regulatory incentives and also mandates on it. For example, in the UK, for example, you have a new SAF mandate, we have to be buying it, and we have been before. But equally, you could use SAF credits in your ETS. So you could reduce your ETS compliance fees by buying SAF. We'd love to see that for removals as well, because as a company who pays into the ETS every single year, if we could pivot some of that investment away from an allowance into a removal credit, then it enables us to buy a lot more. We do have Corsia as the airline community has over the next few years, where we can start using that. But I think ETS would be a game changer, and it promote a lot more companies outside of aviation to also direct their money from just buying allowances to actually investing in projects that are actually going to be reducing carbon and removing carbon.
Yeah, just on that, I think that we're not quite ready to integrate removals into the ETS. I think there's a few policies as part of a policy mix we need, so that doesn't create a shock. If that creates a ton of demand all of a sudden and removal prices spike so much that you wouldn't be able to buy it, then I think that could be a challenge. And so I think we need to, I'm really in favor of, and I do think we're headed towards removals being integrated into the ETS maybe in the 2030s. But I think that we need to put in place subsidies, contracts for differences, more demand from the demand side, so that we can make sure that there's enough supply to meet the demand, and we don't get a price shock all of a sudden that makes it totally untenable to buy removals. I also think it's really important that we consider the quality and the methodologies around durability of that integration. And, Corsia is an interesting example of a sort of market developed exactly for this sector. And I want Corsia to succeed, but right now it has a lot of emissions reduction credits in it, right? And it has a lot of, because that's what's available, and it has a lot of low timeline removals. And so I think we need to get the market ready for that regulation and that scale. And that's why I'm so grateful for companies doing that pre-compliance work to help us get the market ready.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, in the interest of time, we're going to have to wrap up. But thank you for your questions, and please thank our panelists for a fascinating conversation. Thanks,